For 300 years, Dravix had been alone. The massive creature lay curled in the depths of his crystalline cave, his scales shimmering faintly in the pale blue light that filtered through the moon's rocky ceiling. He was an Etherwing, the last one in the entire universe. His kind had once been the guardians of star systems, protectors of entire civilizations, beings of such power and grace that younger races wrote legends about them. But that was before the plague. Before the cosmic disease swept through their species like wildfire, taking them one by one until only Dravix remained. He remembered every single one of them. His mate, his children, his brothers and sisters in flight. Their voices still echoed in his dreams, calling to him across the void of death. So he had come here, to this forgotten moon on the edge of explored space, where no one would bother him. Where he could fade away in peace, the last memory of a dead species. The moon itself was beautiful in a harsh way. Jagged mountains of crystal jutted from the surface, catching the light of distant stars and scattering it in rainbow patterns across the barren landscape. Deep caves ran like veins through the rock, some so vast that Dravix could spread his wings fully inside them. It was here that he made his home, surrounded by silence and the gentle hum of the crystals vibrating in the solar winds. He wanted nothing more than to be left alone. That's why, when the distress signals started screaming across every communication frequency, Dravix simply closed his eyes and ignored them. A ship was in trouble. So what? Ships crashed all the time in this part of space. It wasn't his problem anymore. He had given centuries of service to the galaxy. He had saved countless lives, protected worlds, fought wars that would have consumed entire star systems. He was done. The universe would have to learn to save itself. The ship came down anyway, of course. They always did when they were damaged badly enough. Dravix felt the impact through the ground, a distant rumble that shook loose a few crystals from his cave ceiling. He cracked one massive eye open, tracking the direction of the crash. About 15 kilometers north of his position. Close, but not too close. They would probably send out search parties, maybe establish a small camp while they waited for rescue. As long as they stayed away from his territory, he wouldn't interfere. 3 days passed. Dravix could hear them sometimes, when the wind was right, voices calling to each other, the whine of failing equipment, the sound of makeshift shelters being constructed. Humans, from the sound of it. The young species that seemed to be spreading across the galaxy like weeds, establishing colonies on every remotely habitable rock they could find. Brave, certainly. Foolish, definitely. But not his concern. On the fourth night, something changed. Dravix had been sleeping, which he did more and more these days. What else was there to do? But something woke him, a presence in his cave that hadn't been there before. His eyes snapped open, ancient instincts flaring to life. Had one of the humans been stupid enough to enter his sanctuary? He lifted his head, prepared to release a warning roar that would send any intruder running in terror. But the sound died in his throat. There, nestled against the joint of his left wing where it met his body, was a tiny figure. A human child, no more than 3 years old, with tangled brown hair and a dirty face. She was fast asleep, one small hand clutching his scales like they were the most natural pillow in the universe. Her breathing was soft and steady, completely peaceful. She showed no fear at all. Dravix stared at her in complete bewilderment. How had she gotten here? The entrance to his cave was nearly half a kilometer from the human camp, across treacherous crystal formations that would challenge even an experienced climber. How had a toddler managed it? And more importantly, why wasn't she afraid? Every species in the galaxy knew to fear an Etherwing. It was instinctive, written into their very genes by millions of years of evolution that taught them to recognize apex predators. But this child slept against him like he was nothing more dangerous than a large pet. He tried to stay absolutely still, afraid that any movement would wake her and cause the screaming he knew would come. Except she didn't seem like the screaming type. Even in sleep, she looked stubborn, one little fist clenched tight around his scale like she had decided this was where she belonged and nothing would move her. Dravix found himself studying her with curiosity he hadn't felt in decades. She wore makeshift clothing, probably salvaged from the crash. There was a small cut on her knee that had been bandaged, poorly, but with obvious care. Her feet were wrapped in cloth because her shoes had apparently fallen apart. These humans were struggling to survive out here, that much was obvious. The child stirred slightly, mumbling something in her sleep. Dravix held his breath. But she only snuggled deeper against his wing, seeking warmth in the cool cave air. And for the first time in 300 years, Dravix didn't feel quite so alone. When morning came, Dravix faced a problem he'd never encountered in his 3 centuries of isolation. The child was still asleep on his wing, and he had absolutely no idea what to do about it. He couldn't just leave her here, even he wasn't that cold-hearted. But returning her to the humans meant revealing himself, breaking the solitude he'd maintained for so long. He sat there for nearly an hour, debating with himself, before finally accepting the inevitable. Moving as carefully as a creature his size could manage, Dravik slowly extended his wing. The child, he still didn't know her name, stirred and blinked awake. Her eyes, a bright green that reminded him of earth forests he'd seen centuries ago, focused on his face. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. Then she smiled, reached up, and patted his snout like he was the most normal thing in the world. "Big," she said simply, her voice carrying that matter-of-fact tone that only small children seem to possess. Dravik had no response to that. He gently scooped her up in one massive claw, trying to ignore how fragile she felt, and began the journey toward the human camp. She seemed delighted by the ride, pointing at crystals and giggling when the morning light made rainbow patterns dance across the cave walls. The humans saw him coming from a distance. Dravik heard their shouts of alarm, watched them scramble for weapons they'd salvaged from the wreck. Pathetic things that wouldn't even scratch his scales, but he appreciated the spirit. At least they weren't rolling over and accepting death. He stopped about 50 meters from their camp and carefully set the child down on the ground. That's when all hell broke loose. The little girl immediately started crying, reaching back toward him with both arms. "No. No go," she wailed, tears streaming down her face. She tried to run back to him, but a woman rushed forward and grabbed her, pulling her back toward the camp. The child fought like a wildcat, screaming and reaching for Dravik the entire time. "Lily, stop. That thing is dangerous," the woman shouted, struggling to hold onto the thrashing toddler. So her name was Lily. Somehow that fit. Dravik could see about 30 humans in the camp, most of them looking terrified and exhausted. Their ship was a broken mess behind them, scattered across the crystal field like a child's toy that had been smashed and abandoned. They'd managed to salvage some supplies and set up crude shelters, but it was clear they were in serious trouble. Without help, they'd be dead within weeks. A woman stepped forward from the group, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. She was tall, with dark skin and graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. Despite the obvious fear in her eyes, she walked toward him with her head held high. Brave, Dravik thought. Foolish, but brave. "Please," she called out. "Don't hurt us. We mean you no harm." Dravik snorted, a sound like steam escaping from a pressure valve. As if they could hurt him even if they tried. But he appreciated the attempt at diplomacy. He lowered his massive head to something closer to her level, though she still had to crane her neck to look up at him, and spoke for the first time in decades. His voice rumbled like distant thunder. "The child wandered into my territory. I'm returning her. That's all." The woman's eyes went wide. Behind her, several humans gasped. The woman holding Lily had stopped trying to drag the crying child away and was staring at him in shock. "You're an etherwing," the tall woman breathed. Everyone thought your kind were extinct." "They are," Dravik replied flatly. "I'm the last." Something shifted in the woman's expression. The fear didn't disappear, but it was joined by something else, wonder, maybe, or recognition of shared loss. She took another step closer, ignoring the worried calls from her people. "My name is Dr. Patricia Hayes. I'm a xenobiologist. I've studied your species, what little records remain. You were guardians once. Protectors of entire civilizations." "That was a long time ago," Dravik said. He started to turn away, ready to return to his cave and his solitude. This had been a mistake. He should have just left the child to find her own way back. But then Lily broke free from her mother's grip. Before anyone could stop her, she ran toward Dravik on her short little legs, stumbling over rocks but refusing to slow down. She reached him and wrapped her arms around the nearest part she could reach, which happened to be his front claw, and held on tight. "Stay," she demanded, looking up at him with those impossibly green eyes. "Stay with Lily." Dravik felt something crack inside his chest, some wall he'd built around his heart to keep out the pain of loss. He looked from the child to Dr. Hayes, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Dr. Hayes," one of the other humans called out nervously. "Our water purification system is failing. And we're almost out of medical supplies. The rescue beacon might not even be working properly. We need help." The unspoken question hung in the air. Dravik could feel 30 pairs of eyes on him, some fearful, some hopeful, all desperate. He looked down at Lily, who was still clinging to his claw like she'd never let go. "I'm not a guardian anymore," he said, though the words felt hollow even to him. Dr. Hayes stepped closer, close enough that he could have ended her life with a single breath if he'd wanted to. But she showed no fear, only that same desperate hope he saw in the others. "Please," she said quietly. "We have 19 children in this camp. Lily is the youngest. Without help, they won't survive long enough for rescue to arrive. I'm not asking you to be our guardian. I'm asking you to help us survive long enough to leave. Then we'll never bother you again." Dravix wanted to refuse. He wanted to return to his cave and his crystalline silence and forget he'd ever seen these desperate humans. But Lily was still holding on to him, and somewhere in the back of his ancient mind, he could hear the voices of his own lost children. "Fine," he growled. "But only until you're rescued. Then you leave and never come back to this moon." The relief that washed over the camp was almost physical. Dr. Hayes smiled, genuine warmth breaking through her exhaustion. And Lily, apparently understanding more than anyone gave her credit for, simply nodded and patted his claw. "Thank you," she said solemnly. Dravix had no idea what he'd just agreed to. He only knew that for the first time in 300 years, he had a purpose again. And it terrified him. 2 weeks had passed since Dravix agreed to help the humans. In that time, something unexpected had happened. He'd started to care. He told himself it was just practical necessity, that he was simply keeping them alive until rescue arrived. But the truth was harder to ignore when Lily fell asleep on his wing every single night, or when the human children drew pictures of him on salvaged metal sheets, or when Dr. Hayes sat with him in the evenings and told him stories about Earth, a planet he'd never visited. The humans had proven surprisingly resourceful. With his help locating underground water sources and his ability to move massive crystal formations, they'd built a more stable camp. The engineer, a gruff man named Tommy Chen, had actually managed to get the rescue beacon working properly. Help would come eventually. Dravix told himself he'd be relieved when it did. He was teaching Lily about the constellations visible from the moon's surface when the ships appeared. At first, he thought it was the rescue vessel arriving early. But something felt wrong. The ships descended too quickly, too aggressively. There were 3 of them, sleek and dangerous-looking, bristling with weapons. They didn't broadcast any friendly signals. They didn't even attempt communication. They just opened fire on the camp. Dravix reacted on instinct, spreading his massive wings to shield Lily and several other children who'd been sitting nearby. Energy blasts scorched his scales, pain flaring across his back, but his hide held. The children screamed, and he heard Dr. Hayes shouting orders to take cover behind the larger pieces of wreckage. "Pirates!" Tommy yelled from somewhere in the chaos. "They're salvage crews. They strip crashed ships and sell survivors to the slave markets." Dravix felt his blood run cold. Slave markets. These weren't rescuers. These were predators, and the humans, his humans, when had he started thinking of them that way? Were prey. The pirate ships landed in a triangle formation around the camp, cutting off escape routes. Hatches opened, and creatures poured out. They were a mixed crew, scaled reptilian beings, multilimbed insectoids, even a few mammalian species he recognized from the outer systems. All of them armed, all of them wearing the hard expressions of beings who'd done this many times before. Their leader, a massive 6-limbed creature with scarred gray skin, stepped forward. He carried a weapon that looked designed specifically for killing large animals. His eyes swept across the terrified humans before landing on Dravix, and he smiled, a horrible, knowing expression. Well, the pirate said in Galactic Standard. "An Etherwing. Thought you were all dead. Your scales alone will fetch a fortune, old one. And these humans, fresh stock, untouched by the market. This is our lucky day." Dravix rose to his full height, and the ground trembled beneath him. He was old, yes. He was tired. But he was still an Etherwing, and these pirates had just made a fatal mistake. "Leave," he rumbled, his voice carrying across the crystal fields. "Leave now, and I'll let you live." The pirate leader laughed. "Big words from a relic. We've hunted megafauna across 100 worlds, old creature. We know how to bring down something your size." He raised his weapon. "Take him down, and be careful with those scales. They're worth more intact." The pirates opened fire. What happened next would be talked about in spacer bars across the sector for years to come. Dravix hadn't fought in centuries, but combat instinct ran deeper than memory. He bent space around himself, and the energy blasts curved away, striking crystal formations that exploded in showers of brilliant light. His wings snapped open, and the sheer force of air displacement sent a dozen pirates tumbling backward. One of the ships tried to take off, probably planning to strafe him from above. Dravix gathered energy in his throat, the same energy his kind had once used to shepherd comets and reshape asteroid fields, and released it in a focused beam. The ship's shields held for exactly 2 seconds before collapsing. The vessel crashed back down, smoking and disabled. But the pirates hadn't been lying about hunting large creatures. They scattered and regrouped with practiced efficiency, setting up crossfire positions. Specialized rounds began slamming into Dravix's hide, not energy weapons, but physical projectiles designed to punch through tough armor. Most bounced off or barely penetrated, but some found softer spots between his scales. Pain bloomed along his flanks and legs. He couldn't focus on all of them at once. While he was dealing with the shooters to his left, a group to his right launched some kind of net, probably meant to tangle his wings. He incinerated it before it reached him, but the distraction cost him. The pirate leader had circled around and fired a massive harpoon that buried itself deep in Dravix's shoulder. He roared in pain and fury, spinning faster than something his size should be able to move. His tail caught the leader and sent him flying 50 meters into a crystal formation. The crack of breaking bones was audible even over the chaos of battle. But more pirates kept coming. How many did they have? 30? 40? They worked like a pack of predators taking down prey too large to fight alone. Harpoons and nets, explosives and armor-piercing rounds. Each individual attack was nothing, but together they were bleeding him slowly. Then he heard it. A child scream. Dravix's head snapped around. One of the pirates, a reptilian creature with quick movements, had broken through the human defenses and grabbed Lily. She was kicking and screaming, reaching toward Dravix with both arms. Her mother was trying to reach her, but 2 more pirates blocked her path. Something ancient and primal ignited in Dravix's chest. The guardian instinct, the protector drive that his species had been born with, that had been bred into them across millions of years of evolution. The thing he thought had died with his people. It hadn't died. It had only been sleeping. He didn't roar this time. He moved. Space folded around him, and suddenly he was there, between the pirate and the human camp. His claw came down on the reptilian creature with enough force to crater the ground beneath it. The pirate dropped Lily, and Dr. Hayes darted forward to scoop her daughter up. The remaining pirates saw the change in him. Saw something in his eyes that made their own instincts scream danger. Some of the smarter ones started backing toward their ships. They didn't make it. Dravix fought like his ancestors had fought, like the guardian he'd been born to be. He was everywhere at once, wings creating walls of force, energy beams precisely targeted, physical strength that could crush metal and stone. The pirates had weapons designed to kill large creatures, yes. But they'd never faced an either wing protecting something it cared about. When the last pirate ship limped into the sky, trailing smoke and carrying what few survivors could escape, Dravix stood among the wreckage of the 2 vessels he destroyed. His body was covered in wounds, harpoons still embedded in his hide, burns across his scales, deep cuts bleeding luminescent blue blood onto the crystal ground. He took 1 step toward the human camp. Then another. His vision was starting to blur. How much blood had he lost? Too much, probably. His legs felt weak. Lily ran toward him, her mother calling after her. The little girl reached him just as his strength finally gave out. He collapsed, his massive body sending tremors through the ground. The last thing he felt before darkness claimed him was a small hand touching his face, and a child's voice saying, "Don't go. Please don't go." Then nothing. Dravix woke to voices arguing above him. His entire body felt like it was on fire, every scale aching, every muscle screaming. He tried to move and immediately regretted it as fresh waves of pain rolled through him. We can't just pull them out. That was Tommy, the engineer. Those harpoons have barbed tips. We yank them, and he'll bleed out in minutes. Then what do you suggest? Dr. Hayes sounded exhausted and desperate. We leave them in and let the wounds fester? He saved our lives. We have to do something. I'm not saying we don't try. I'm saying we need a plan better than pull and hope. Dravix forced his eyes open. The first thing he saw was Lily, curled up next to his head, fast asleep despite the frantic activity around them. Someone had covered her with a thermal blanket. The sight of her, safe and peaceful, made something in his chest tighten. Dr. Hayes noticed he was awake. She rushed over, relief flooding her face. Don't try to move. You're hurt badly. We're working on a way to help you. Leave me, Dravix managed to rasp out. His voice sounded weak even to his own ears. I'm old. These wounds, they would have been nothing when I was younger. Now nothing, Dr. Hayes interrupted firmly. You think we're going to let you die after what you did for us? Humans don't abandon family. Family. The word hit him harder than any of the pirates' weapons. He wanted to tell her he wasn't family, that he was just fulfilling a temporary obligation. But the words wouldn't come. Not when he could see 19 children helping their parents gather supplies. Not when Lily was sleeping trustingly against his scales. Not when these fragile, short-lived creatures were refusing to give up on him. Over the next hours, Dravix watched something remarkable happen. The humans mobilized like a military unit, but with a compassion and creativity he'd never seen before. Dr. Hayes became the commander of an impromptu surgical team, working with whatever they had. Tommy and 2 other engineers studied the harpoons, taking careful measurements and sketching designs on salvaged metal. These barbs are designed to expand once they're in, Tommy explained to anyone listening. But if we can create a sleeve that goes around each harpoon, we might be able to collapse the barbs before extraction. A younger woman named Ashley, who'd been a medical student before joining the colony ship, mixed compounds from their meager medical supplies with minerals from the crushed crystals around them. His blood is bioluminescent, she muttered, more to herself than anyone. Which means it probably has different coagulation properties than ours. But the crystal dust seems to react with it. Look, it's forming a gel. Maybe we can use this to seal the wounds. Another man, an older colonist named Robert who'd been a veterinarian back on Earth, carefully cleaned the burns across Dravix's scales. I once treated an elephant with electrical burns, he said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. Different scale, obviously, but the principle might be similar. We need to prevent infection and promote tissue regeneration. Lily woke up and immediately started organizing the other children. We need soft things, she announced with the absolute authority only a 3-year-old could muster. For when he gets better. So he's comfortable. The children scattered across the camp, returning with every scrap of fabric they could find, blankets, clothing, pieces of the ship's insulation. They piled it all near Dravix's head, creating a nest of sorts. Some of the older children drew pictures and placed them where he could see them. Images of him fighting the pirates, of him with wings spread protecting the camp. In every picture, they'd drawn him larger than life, heroic. Dr. Hayes knelt beside his head while her team worked. We're going to start the extractions soon. I won't lie to you, this is going to hurt. A lot. We don't have anesthesia strong enough for something your size. I've endured worse, Dravix said, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. I know you have. But you don't have to do this alone. She gestured to the camp around them. That's what makes us human, I think. We're not the strongest species, or the smartest, or the longest lived. But we're really, really good at taking care of each other. And right now, you're one of us. The extraction process was agony. Each harpoon had to be carefully sleeved before removal, a process that took nearly an hour per wound. Dravix felt every second of it. But whenever the pain threatened to overwhelm him, he'd hear the humans. Tommy cursing as he modified another extraction sleeve. Ashley mixing more of her crystalline gel compound. Robert's steady hands cleaning and dressing each wound as it was freed. And always, constantly, Lily was there. She couldn't help with the medical work, but she talked to him. Endless streams of 3-year-old conversation about everything and nothing. She told him about her favorite foods back on the colony ship. About her best friend who was 4 years old and could already read. About how she wanted to be able to fly like him when she grew up. The other children took turns too, each one coming to sit by his head and talk. They told him stories, sang songs he didn't recognize, showed him their drawings. They treated him not like a dangerous predator or an ancient relic, but like someone who mattered. Like someone who belonged. On the 3rd day, as Dr. Hayes removed the last harpoon and sealed the wound with Ashley's crystal gel, Dravix finally understood something that had puzzled him about humans since he'd first encountered them centuries ago. They were pack animals in a way most species weren't. They didn't just protect their genetic relatives, they created families out of anyone they decided belonged. Adoption wasn't just something they did legally, it was built into their psychology, their culture, their very souls. And somehow, without him quite realizing when it happened, they'd adopted him. That night, after the last wound was dressed and Dr. Hayes finally allowed herself to sleep, Dravix lay under the stars of the forgotten moon. His body still ached, but he could feel his healing factor starting to work. It would take time, but he would recover. Humans had made sure of that. Lily was asleep on his wing as always, but tonight she wasn't alone. Several other children had joined her, creating a small pile of sleeping humans using him as a bed. Their parents had tried to move them, but Dr. Hayes had stopped them. Let them be, she'd said quietly. He saved their lives. And I think maybe they're saving his too. Dravix looked at the drawings the children had made, now carefully arranged on crystal stands around him. At the nest of soft materials they'd gathered. At the humans who'd worked for 3 days straight to keep him alive. At the little girl who'd wandered into his cave 2 weeks ago and somehow changed everything. For the first time in 300 years, he didn't feel the crushing weight of being the last. He felt something else entirely. Something he'd thought he'd lost forever. He felt like he had a purpose again. And this time, it wasn't a duty assigned to him by his species. It was a choice he was making himself. He was choosing them. Recovery was slow, but humans, Dravix discovered, were remarkably patient when it came to someone they cared about. For the first week, he could barely move without pain shooting through his entire body. The humans brought him water from the underground springs he'd shown them, carried food they'd managed to cultivate from their seed stores, and kept constant watch to make sure his wounds weren't getting infected. Lily appointed herself his primary nurse, a role she took with absolute seriousness. Every morning, she'd climb up to check on him, patting his scales and announcing whether he looked better or same as yesterday. She'd sit with him for hours, chattering away about everything the other children were doing, what new games they'd invented, which of the adults had said something funny. But as Dravix's strength returned, something else began to happen. The humans started asking him questions. Not just practical ones about survival, but deeper things. They wanted to know about his species, about the worlds he'd protected, about what the galaxy had been like centuries ago. One evening, as the twin suns set and painted the crystal fields in shades of orange and purple, nearly the entire camp gathered around him. The children sat closest, cross-legged and wide-eyed. The adults stood or sat behind them, equally attentive. "Tell us about the Etherwings," Dr. Hayes said gently. "Not the legends or the historical records. Tell us the real story. Your story." So Dravix did. He talked about his people, how they'd evolved on a world where the gravity was twice what most species could tolerate, how they'd learned to fold space before they'd even developed what others would call technology. He told them about the bondmates, about how Etherwings paired for life and could sense each other across star systems. He spoke about his own mate, about their children, about the joy of teaching young ones to manipulate the fabric of reality itself. And he told them about the plague. How it had started in the core systems and spread faster than anyone could track. How there'd been no warning, no symptoms until it was too late. How he'd watched his entire species vanish in less than a generation, until he alone remained. When he finished, there was silence. Then Lily stood up, walked over to him, and very seriously wrapped her small arms around the part of his leg she could reach. "You're not alone anymore," she said simply. "You have us." Several of the adult humans wiped their eyes. Dr. Hayes nodded, her expression thoughtful. "We understand loss too," she said quietly. "Everyone in this camp left someone behind on Earth. Parents, siblings, friends. We came out here looking for new homes, new families. I think maybe you've been doing the same thing, whether you knew it or not." The days that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. As Dravix regained his mobility, he taught the humans everything he knew about surviving on the harsh moon. He showed them which crystal formations could be carved into tools, how to read the wind patterns to predict the vicious storms that sometimes swept across the surface, where to find deposits of minerals they could use for medicine and construction. In return, the humans shared their culture with him. They played music on instruments they'd salvaged or improvised, haunting melodies that spoke of longing and hope. They told stories from Earth, tales of heroes and ordinary people doing extraordinary things. They taught him their games, laughing when he tried to play cards with claws far too large for the tiny pieces of paper. One afternoon, Tommy approached him with an unusual request. "We got the long-range scanner working," he said. "And we've been picking up some interesting signals. There are 3 potentially habitable planets within a month's travel from here. Young colonies, frontier worlds. They're asking for help, everything from dealing with dangerous wildlife to establishing infrastructure." Dravix listened, unsure where this was going. Tommy continued, "The rescue ship will be here in about 2 weeks. They'll take us to the nearest established colony world, and from there, we'll figure out our next steps." But Dr. Hayes had an idea, and well, we all talked about it. "We wanted to run it by you first." Dr. Hayes joined them, Lily riding on her shoulders. "These frontier worlds," she said, "they're exactly the kind of places that used to have guardians. Places where a single catastrophe could wipe out an entire colony before help could arrive. Places that could really use someone with your abilities." Dravix felt his hearts, he had too, begin to beat faster. "What are you suggesting?" Come with us, Dr. Hayes said simply. Not as some ancient relic trying to fade away, but as what you've always been. A protector. These colonies need guardians, and we, she gestured to the camp around them, to all 30 humans who were now watching the conversation with hopeful expressions, we need you. Not just for protection. As family. You want me to follow you around the galaxy? Dravix asked, trying to keep the hope out of his voice. More than that, Tommy interjected. We want to partner with you. There's a federation of frontier colonies forming. They're calling it the Outer Rim Alliance. Small worlds, independent communities, humans and other species trying to build something new away from the core systems. What if we proposed something radical? What if you became the first guardian of the new age? Not serving anyone, but choosing to protect those who need it most. Ashley, the medical student, spoke up from the crowd. We've been talking to the other colonies through the repaired communications array. When we told them about you, about what you did for us, they were amazed. Some of the older species representatives remembered the Etherwings. They said the galaxy was safer when guardians flew between the stars. Dravix looked around at all of them. At faces that had become familiar, at children who drew pictures of him, at adults who'd worked themselves to exhaustion to save his life. At Lily, who was grinning at him with absolute confidence that he'd say yes. He thought about his cave, about the centuries of solitude he'd endured. About the silence and the loneliness and the slow fade into irrelevance he'd been planning. Then he thought about these past weeks, about purpose and belonging, about the strange joy of teaching children and sharing stories with adults, about what it felt like to be needed again. I'm old, he said slowly. I'm not what I once was. None of us are what we once were, Dr. Hayes replied. We left Earth behind. We survived a crash that should have killed us. We fought off pirates and built a life on a hostile moon. We're all becoming something new. Why not do it together? Lily wriggled out of her mother's arms and ran to Dravix, climbing up his leg with the practiced ease of someone who'd done it 100 times. She sat on his shoulder and leaned against his neck. Please come, she said quietly, just to him. I'll miss you if you stay here. And that, Dravix realized, was the heart of it. These humans had done something impossible. They'd taken the last survivor of an extinct species, a creature who'd given up on life and purpose, and they'd made him want to live again. Not just exist, but truly live. I'll need to know where we're going first, he said, and the cheer that went up from the humans echoed across the crystal fields. 2 weeks later, when the rescue ship arrived, the crew found something they hadn't expected. Instead of desperate survivors, they found a thriving temporary settlement. And perched on a crystal outcropping above it all was an Etherwing, the last one in existence, with a human child riding on his back. The rescue captain, a grizzled alien who'd seen a lot in his years, could only stare. Is that really? That's Dravix, Dr. Hayes said proudly. Our guardian. And he's coming with us. The journey to the first frontier colony took 3 weeks. Dravix flew alongside the rescue ship, his massive form keeping pace with the vessel as it traveled through the void. Inside, Lily pressed her face against the viewport, waving at him every few hours. He'd wave back with a wing, making her laugh. When they finally arrived at New Haven, a young colony on the edge of explored space, word of the Etherwing had already spread. The entire population, nearly 300 humans and aliens, came out to watch him land. Children pointed and gasped. Adults whispered in awe. Dravix touched down gently, and Lily slid off his back, running to her mother. He looked at the colony, at the hastily built structures, at the worried faces, at a community clearly struggling to survive in a hostile environment. He saw problems he could solve, dangers he could protect against, people he could help. He saw purpose. Dr. Hayes stood beside him, looking out at their new home. Think you can handle guardian duty again? She asked with a smile. Dravix spread his wings, feeling the sun warm his scales, feeling alive in a way he hadn't in centuries. I think, he said slowly, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Lily ran back and hugged his leg. Other children, emboldened by her fearlessness, started approaching too. Soon he was surrounded by young ones asking questions, wanting to touch his scales, begging for stories. And Dravix, the last Etherwing, the guardian who'd thought his time was over, looked down at them and realized something profound. He wasn't the last of his kind. He was the first of something new. Not an Etherwing of the old galaxy, bound by duty and tradition, but a guardian of the new age, one who chose his purpose, who chose his family, who chose to protect not because he had to, but because he wanted to. The humans had given him that gift. And he would spend however many years he had left returning it. Above them, ships came and went. The frontier called. And for the first time in 300 years, Dravix flew toward the future instead of hiding from it. He had found his flight again. And this time, he wasn't flying alone.